My name is Sarah, and I'm 24 years old. This happened to me about 2 years ago when I was living in a small apartment complex in Oregon. I had just started a new job at a local marketing firm and was still getting used to the routine of working late nights to impress my new boss. The extra hours were exhausting, but I needed to prove myself since I was the newest hire on the team. It was a Thursday evening around 9 p.m. when I finally left the office. I decided to visit my friend Jake, who lived about 15 minutes away from my place. Jake and I had been friends since college, and he always had a way of cheering me up after stressful days. His apartment was in a quieter neighborhood with tree-lined streets and older houses that had been converted into small rental units. I parked my Honda Civic in front of his building and noticed a dark blue sedan parked across the street. I didn't think much of it at first, since street parking was common in that area. Jake lived on the second floor of a converted Victorian house, and I climbed the narrow wooden stairs to his door. We spent the evening watching movies and catching up on work drama. Jake made his famous pasta dish, and we shared a bottle of wine while complaining about our respective jobs. Around midnight, I realized I should head home since I had another long day ahead of me. Jake walked me to the door, and I headed downstairs to my car. As I fumbled with my keys in the dim streetlight, I noticed that same dark blue sedan was still parked in the exact same spot. The engine was running, and I could see the silhouette of someone sitting in the driver's seat. A chill ran through me, but I told myself it was probably just someone waiting for a friend or maybe a rideshare driver. I got in my car and drove home, taking my usual route through the residential streets. About halfway home, I glanced in my rearview mirror and saw headlights that seemed to be maintaining the same distance behind me. When I turned left onto Maple Street, the headlights turned too. When I made a right onto my street, the car followed again. My heart started beating faster, but I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they just happened to be going in the same direction. I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, and the blue sedan drove slowly past the entrance. I sat in my car for a few minutes watching the street, but didn't see the vehicle return. I convinced myself I was being paranoid and went inside. My apartment was on the ground floor of a small complex with only 12 units. I double-checked my locks and went to bed, but had trouble sleeping. The next evening, I decided to visit Jake again. I had been looking forward to it all day, since work had been particularly stressful. My boss had criticized a presentation I'd worked on for hours, and I needed Jake's encouragement to keep my spirits up. I drove the same route and parked in the same spot in front of his building. That's when I saw it again. The same dark blue sedan parked across the street in the identical position as the night before. This time I paid closer attention. It was an older model sedan with tinted windows, and I could barely make out the figure inside. The person appeared to be wearing dark clothing and was sitting very still. I felt my stomach drop, but decided to ignore it and go inside. Jake and I had dinner and watched another movie. I found myself distracted and kept glancing toward the window, even though his apartment faced the back of the building. Around 11 p.m., I told Jake I was worried about a car that had been parked outside both nights. He offered to walk me to my car and take a look. We went downstairs together, and sure enough, the blue sedan was still there. Jake suggested we approach the car to see what was going on, but something inside me screamed not to. Instead, I asked him to just stay with me until I got safely in my car. As we stood on the sidewalk talking, I noticed the person in the sedan had turned slightly and seemed to be watching us. I hugged Jake goodbye and got in my car. This time I decided to take a different route home to see if the sedan would follow. I drove through the downtown area, taking several unnecessary turns and stops. Every time I checked my mirror, I saw the same headlights maintaining distance behind me. When I stopped at a red light, the sedan stopped too. When I turned into a 24-hour gas station, the sedan pulled into the parking lot of a closed restaurant across the street. I sat in the gas station parking lot for about 10 minutes, pretending to use my phone. The sedan waited in the restaurant lot with its engine running. Finally, I drove home, taking the most direct route. The sedan followed me all the way to my apartment complex, and this time, instead of driving past, it pulled into the visitors' parking area. I parked in my usual spot and sat in my car watching the sedan through my side mirror. The driver turned off the engine but remained in the car. I waited for about 20 minutes, but the person never got out. Eventually, I made a quick dash to my apartment and locked the door behind me. I peeked through my blinds and could see the sedan still sitting in the visitors area. I barely slept that night. Every small sound made me jump, and I kept checking the window. Around 3 a.m., I looked outside and the sedan was gone. I felt a mixture of relief and confusion. Maybe I had been overreacting after all. The next morning, I left for work early and didn't see the sedan anywhere. I had a busy day and almost forgot about the incidents from the previous 2 nights. But as evening approached, I felt anxious about going to Jake's house again. I called him and explained what had been happening. He was concerned and insisted I come over anyway. He said if the sedan showed up again, we would call the police. I drove to Jake's house around 7 p.m. and parked in front of his building. I immediately looked across the street, and my blood turned to ice. The same dark blue sedan was parked in the exact same spot. This time I was certain it wasn't a coincidence. Someone was definitely following me. Jake was waiting by his window and had already seen the car. He came downstairs and we stood on the sidewalk staring at the sedan. The person inside didn't move or acknowledge us in any way. Jake said he was going to walk over and confront whoever it was, but I grabbed his arm and begged him not to. Something about the situation felt dangerous, and I didn't want to escalate things. Instead, we went inside and Jake immediately called the police. They said they would send an officer to check on the situation. We watched from Jake's window as a patrol car arrived about 30 minutes later. The officer approached the sedan and spoke to the driver for several minutes. Then the sedan drove away and the officer came to talk to us. The officer explained that the driver claimed to be waiting for someone in the neighborhood and insisted he wasn't bothering anyone. Since he wasn't technically breaking any laws by sitting in a parked car on a public street, there wasn't much they could do. The officer took down my information and said I should call immediately if I saw the sedan again. I stayed at Jake's house until almost 2 a.m. that night. We kept checking the window, but the sedan never returned. When I finally drove home, I took a complicated route through several neighborhoods, but didn't see any signs of being followed. I made it home safely, and the visitors' parking area was empty. For the next few days, I avoided going to Jake's house. I was too scared to find out if the sedan would appear again. Jake kept texting me, asking if I was okay and encouraging me to not let some creep control my life. After about a week, I finally worked up the courage to visit him again. This time, I asked my coworker Marcus to follow me in his car. Marcus was a big guy who worked out regularly, and he had offered to help when I explained my situation. We drove to Jake's house and I parked in my usual spot. Marcus parked a few spaces behind me, and we both got out to look around. The blue sedan was nowhere to be seen. I felt relieved, but also somehow disappointed. Part of me had wanted to confront the situation once and for all. We went inside and had a normal evening with Jake. When it was time to leave, Marcus followed me home, and I made it safely without incident. I never saw that blue sedan again. I continued visiting Jake regularly and never had another problem. But for months afterward, I found myself constantly checking my mirrors when driving and looking over my shoulder in parking lots. I still wonder who was in that car and what they wanted. The thought that someone was watching me for 3 nights straight still gives me chills. My name is Albert, and I'm 28 years old. I work as a software developer for a tech company in Seattle. This story takes place about 18 months ago when I was living in a studio apartment in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. I had recently moved there from a smaller city and was still adjusting to urban life. My daily routine was pretty consistent. I would leave work around 6 p.m. and take the bus home since parking downtown was expensive and I didn't want to deal with Seattle traffic. The bus stop was about 2 blocks from my apartment building on Pine Street. It was usually busy with commuters, and I felt safe walking home, even after dark. The area around my apartment was typical for Capitol Hill, with lots of young professionals, restaurants, and late-night establishments. There were always people walking around, which made me feel secure. My building was a newer construction with about 40 units and decent security, including keycard access and cameras in common areas. It was a Tuesday in November when I first noticed him. I had just gotten off the bus and was walking toward my building when I saw a man in a dark hoodie standing near the coffee shop on the corner. He was tall and thin, with the hood pulled up over his head. What struck me as odd was that he wasn't moving or doing anything. He was just standing there facing my direction. I walked past him to get to my building and used my keycard to enter. As I waited for the elevator, I glanced back through the glass doors and saw the man still standing in the same spot. He appeared to be looking directly at the building entrance. I felt uneasy, but told myself he was probably just waiting for someone, or maybe homeless and looking for a place to rest. I went up to my studio on the 4th floor and settled in for the evening. I heated up some leftover Thai food and worked on a personal coding project I'd been developing in my spare time. Around 10 p.m. I looked out my window, which faced Pine Street, and saw the man in the hoodie standing across the street from my building. He was in the shadows between two streetlights, but I could make out his silhouette. I watched him for about 15 minutes, but he never moved. Finally, I convinced myself I was being paranoid and went to bed. I had an early meeting the next day and needed to get some sleep, but I found myself tossing and turning thinking about the strange man outside. The next evening, I left work at my usual time and took the same bus route home. As I got off at my stop, I immediately looked toward the coffee shop corner. The man in the hoodie was there again, standing in almost the exact same position as the night before. This time I paid closer attention to his appearance. He was wearing dark jeans and white sneakers under the black hoodie. His hands were shoved deep in his pockets, and his head was tilted slightly downward. I walked past him again, trying to act casual, but I could feel him watching me. I used my keycard to enter the building and pressed the elevator button. While waiting, I turned around and saw him walking slowly in my direction. He stopped about 20 feet from the building entrance and just stood there, staring at the glass doors. Upstairs, in my apartment, I immediately went to the window. The man was now standing directly across the street from the building, in the same spot as the previous night. I grabbed my phone and took a photo, but it was too dark and too far away to make out any details. I decided to call the building security company, but they said unless he was on the property or making threats there, wasn't much they could do. I spent the evening working on my laptop, but kept getting distracted by thoughts of the man outside. Every 20 minutes or so I would check the window, and he was always there. Around midnight, I looked again, and he was gone. I felt relieved, but also confused about what his intentions might be. Thursday evening followed the same pattern. I got off the bus and saw the man in the hoodie at the coffee shop corner. I walked past him, and he followed at a distance, stopping near my building entrance. When I looked out my window later, he was standing across the street in his usual spot. This time I decided to document everything, so I started a log on my phone, noting the times and his locations. By Friday, I was genuinely scared. The man had been following me for 4 consecutive nights, and I couldn't think of any innocent explanation. I considered taking a different route home, but I would have to walk much farther and through less populated areas. I also thought about staying late at work, but I had weekend plans and needed to get home. I got off the bus Friday evening and immediately spotted the man at the coffee shop corner. This time I decided to test whether he was really following me or if it was just a coincidence. Instead of walking directly to my building, I turned left and walked toward the grocery store 2 blocks away. I glanced back and saw the man had started walking in my direction. I went into the grocery store and browsed the aisles for about 10 minutes. When I came out, the man was standing near the entrance, but turned away when he saw me. I walked to my building, taking a longer route, and he followed at a distance the entire time. When I got upstairs and looked out my window, he was in his usual spot across the street. I called my friend Logan, who lived in the neighborhood, and explained what had been happening. Logan was a former Marine and had a no-nonsense attitude about these situations. He said he would come over and help me confront the man. I wasn't sure if that was a good idea, but I was running out of options. Logan arrived at my apartment around 9 p.m., and we looked out the window together. The man in the hoodie was in his usual position across the street. Logan wanted to go down and talk to him, but I was worried about making the situation worse. We decided to at least go outside and see if we could get a better look at him. We took the elevator down and walked out of the building together. The man saw us coming and started walking away quickly. Logan called out to him, but he ignored us and disappeared around the corner. We walked to where he had been standing and looked around but didn't see him anywhere. I thought maybe Logan's presence had scared him off and the problem was solved. But Saturday evening, when I came home from running errands, I saw the man at the coffee shop corner again. This time he was wearing the same hoodie, but with different pants. When I walked past him, he followed me to my building just like before. I called Logan again, and he came over immediately. We went outside, but the man was gone. Logan suggested we call the police, since this was clearly stalking behavior. I was reluctant because I didn't have any proof of threats or actual crimes, but Logan convinced me it was the right thing to do. The police officer who responded was professional and took my statement seriously. He said they would increase patrols in the area and advised me to call immediately if I saw the man again. He also suggested I vary my routine and consider staying elsewhere for a few days if possible. Sunday night I stayed at Logan's apartment, which was about a mile away. Monday evening I came home from work and didn't see the man anywhere. I felt cautiously optimistic that maybe the police presence had deterred him. Tuesday and Wednesday passed without incident and I started to relax, but Thursday evening there he was again, standing at the coffee shop corner in the same dark hoodie, as if nothing had happened. I immediately called the police from my phone while standing on the sidewalk. The officer arrived within about 10 minutes, but by then the man had disappeared. The officer walked around the area with me and took another statement. He said they would try to have someone positioned nearby the next evening to catch the man in the act. I appreciated their effort, but I was starting to feel like this would never end. Friday evening I left work early and took a different bus route to see if the man would still appear. I got off at a stop about 6 blocks from my apartment and walked home through residential streets. I didn't see the man anywhere and thought maybe I had outsmarted him, but when I got to my building and looked back toward Pine Street, I saw him standing under a streetlight about a block away. He had somehow figured out my new route and was still following me. I felt defeated and scared. This person seemed to know my habits better than I did. I called Logan and the police again. This time they stationed an officer near my building, but the man never showed up that night. I think he must have seen the patrol car and decided to stay away, but I knew he would probably be back. The following Monday, I made a decision that changed everything. I had been offered a job opportunity in Portland that I had been considering. The salary was better, and it would be a fresh start. I decided to take the position and move away from Seattle. I never saw the man in the hoodie again after that Friday night. I sometimes wonder if he was just a disturbed individual who fixated on me randomly, or if there was something more sinister about his behavior. Moving to Portland was the best decision I could have made. I've been here for over a year now, and nothing like that has ever happened again. My name is Rebecca, and I'm 31 years old. I work as a nurse at a children's hospital in Denver, Colorado. This story happened to me about 8 months ago when I was living alone in a small house I was renting in the Highlands neighborhood. I had moved there after my divorce was finalized because I wanted a fresh start and my own space. The house was built in the 1940s and had a lot of character with hardwood floors and a covered front porch. I loved the neighborhood because it was quiet and family-friendly with tree-lined streets and well-maintained properties. My work schedule was demanding with long shifts at the hospital, but I enjoyed the peace and quiet when I came home. It was a Friday evening in March when I found the first doll. I had just finished a particularly exhausting 12-hour shift dealing with several emergency cases. All I wanted was to get home, take a hot shower, and order some takeout food. I pulled into my driveway around 7 p.m. and grabbed my purse and work bag from the passenger seat. As I walked up the 3 steps to my front porch, I noticed something sitting next to my door. It was a small porcelain doll about 6 inches tall with curly blonde hair and a blue dress. The doll was positioned sitting upright with its back against the door frame. I stopped and stared at it for a moment, feeling confused and slightly disturbed. I looked around my front yard and the street to see if there were any children playing nearby who might have left it there. But the neighborhood was quiet, and I didn't see anyone. I picked up the doll and examined it more closely. It appeared to be handmade with delicate features and high-quality clothing. The face was painted with rosy cheeks and bright blue eyes that seemed to stare right at me. I thought maybe it belonged to one of the neighbor kids and had been left there by mistake. I decided to ask around the next day to see if anyone was missing a doll. In the meantime, I brought it inside and placed it on my kitchen counter. I ordered Chinese food and tried to forget about the strange. I discovered that the next morning I knocked on doors in my immediate neighborhood asking if anyone had lost a doll. Mrs. Patterson, who lived across the street, said she hadn't seen any children playing in my yard. The young couple next door didn't have kids and had no idea where the doll might have come from. After checking with about 6 neighbors, I gave up and decided to donate the doll to charity. The following Friday, I came home from another long shift at the hospital. I was looking forward to the weekend and had plans to meet some friends for dinner. As I walked up to my front door, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was another doll sitting in the exact same spot as the week before. This one was slightly different, but clearly from the same collection or maker. It had dark brown hair and was wearing a red dress with tiny white buttons. Like the first doll, it was positioned sitting upright with its back against the doorframe. The painted face had the same rosy cheeks and bright eyes that seemed to follow me as I moved. I felt my heart rate increase as I looked around the neighborhood. It was about 6 p.m. and there were a few people walking dogs and kids, playing in yards, but no one was paying attention to my house. I picked up the doll and noticed it had the same high-quality craftsmanship as the first one. Someone was definitely leaving these deliberately. I brought the doll inside and placed it next to the first one on my kitchen counter. I tried to think of logical explanations. Maybe it was a secret admirer or someone trying to be friendly in an unusual way. But something about the situation felt unsettling, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I decided to install a security camera on my front porch. I went to the hardware store and bought a wireless camera system that would send alerts to my phone. I set it up that weekend and positioned it to capture anyone who approached my front door. I felt better knowing I would be able to see who was leaving the dolls. The third Friday arrived, and I was anxious all day at work, wondering if another doll would appear. I checked my phone constantly, but didn't receive any alerts from the security camera. When I got home around 8 p.m., I was almost disappointed to see my front porch was empty. Maybe whoever was leaving the dolls had gotten bored or moved on. But Saturday morning, when I went outside to get my newspaper, there was another doll sitting by my door. This one had red hair and was wearing a green dress with lace trim. I immediately checked my phone for camera alerts, but there were none. I reviewed the footage from the entire night, but saw nothing unusual. Somehow the person had managed to leave the doll without being detected by the camera. I was really starting to feel scared at this point. Someone was clearly watching my house and had figured out how to avoid my security system. I called my ex-husband Harper, even though we weren't on great terms. He was a police officer, and I thought he might have some advice about the situation. Harper listened to my story and agreed that it was concerning. He said he would drive by my house periodically during his patrols and advised him to keep detailed records of when the dolls appeared. He also suggested I install additional cameras and motion-activated lights around my property. I spent the weekend upgrading my security system with Harper's help. We installed cameras at multiple angles and added motion sensors that would trigger bright lights. I also changed my routine so I wasn't coming home at the same time every Friday. I thought surely this would catch whoever was leaving the dolls, but the next Friday there was another doll waiting for me. This one had black hair and was wearing a yellow dress with tiny flowers embroidered on it. Once again, my cameras had captured nothing, and there were no signs of anyone approaching my house. I was starting to feel like I was losing my mind. I called Harper again, and he came over to review all the camera footage with me. We went through hours of recordings from different angles, but found nothing suspicious. Harper suggested the person might be approaching from an area not covered by the cameras, or using some kind of equipment to disable them remotely. The dolls kept appearing every Friday for 2 more weeks. Each one was unique but clearly part of the same collection. I now had 6 dolls sitting on my kitchen counter, staring at me with their painted eyes. I was barely sleeping and had become paranoid about every sound and shadow around my house. I decided to take a different approach. Instead of trying to catch the person, I would try to communicate with them. I wrote a note asking who they were and what they wanted. I left it on my front porch where the dolls usually appeared. The next morning, the note was gone, but there was no response. The following Friday, I came home to find not just a doll, but a handwritten note. The doll had platinum blonde hair and was wearing a purple dress with silver buttons. The note was written in neat, cursive handwriting and said, "You're so beautiful when you sleep." I felt sick to my stomach reading those words. I called Harper immediately, and he rushed over with 2 other officers. They treated my house as a crime scene and dusted for fingerprints on the doll and note. They also searched my entire property, looking for signs of forced entry or surveillance equipment. Harper insisted I stay at his apartment that night while they processed everything. The forensics team found evidence that someone had been in my backyard regularly. There were footprints in the flower beds and scratches on my bedroom window screen. They also discovered a small hole that had been drilled in my fence where someone could observe my house without being seen. I never went back to that house. Harper helped me pack my belongings, and I moved into a secure apartment complex across town. The police investigation continued for several weeks, but they never identified the person who had been stalking me. The dolls and note didn't yield any useful fingerprints or DNA evidence. I still have nightmares about those dolls and their painted eyes staring at me. I've thrown away all the dolls except one, which I kept as evidence. Sometimes I wonder if the person is still out there looking for me, or if they found someone else to terrorize. I'm much more careful about my personal security now, and I'll never live alone in a house again.